Okay, it is 1:10 p.m. Chicago time. Welcome back. For the next half hour, I'm going to focus on deploying Windows 11 in the enterprise. I will be your host. My name is Johan, and like the previous presenters, I absolutely love questions. So keep them coming in the Q&A or in the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on both of these guys here, monitor to the left. But the good news is that deploying Windows 11 is not really too much different from Windows 10, with some exceptions that we will learn in this little session here. But in terms of core deployment scenarios, Windows 11 supports the same. So the two most commonly one is, of course, going to be new computer and in-place upgrades, because that's how we do servicing. So you can easily add in a servicing stack after this. It's going to be the same thing. From what I'm told, Windows 11 won't have any enablement packages going from one version to the next. If that's going to be the case forever, I don't know. We'll see as time goes by. But for now, at least when going from Windows 10 to 11, it is indeed a full in-place upgrade. Whereas the Windows 10 versions, you don't have to. For those of you that are already up on Windows 10 2004, going to any of the newer versions like 20H2 or 21H1, or even the upcoming now 21H2, it's a tiny enablement package. And by all means, if you guys are on Windows 10 2004, you better get away from it quickly, deploy that enablement package quickly, because that version goes out of support next month. So time flies by quickly when you're having fun. Refresh and replace scenarios, I don't see being used as much, but it is still supported scenarios. The interesting part here is that currently there is only one fully supported imaging solution for Windows 11, and that is config manager current branch 2107, and of course the upcoming 2111 as well. Now, the old MBT deployment tool with the hotfix, it works. I've done quite some testing. I know Mike has did some testing as well, and he blogged about his findings with this. So even though if there is no official support for it, it seems to be working just fine. And I guess it helps also that Windows 11, if you look at the versioning in the components, like in the ADK and in Windows itself, it's still version 10 on all of those things. It's not like there is a completely brand new versioning scheme behind the scenes. What does add a little bit of complexity, organizations who want to start to test Windows 11 this year, and this is going to be my recommendation as well. 2021 is when we start to play around and tinker and test and learn Windows 11 and how it works with the stuff that we have in the organization. I don't really recommend any organization to do ahead and do like a wide scale production type deployment of Windows 11 just only a month into a new version, because there will be some findings that needs to happen. There need to be some bugs that needs to be fixed, but vendors need to catch up with drivers and whatnot. I mean, if you go to Dell, HP, Lenovo, start to browse through the various models and look for Windows 11 drivers, you won't find too much. And the various vendor management tools, they don't have support for Windows 11 yet either. So the ecosystem always takes a little bit time to come around and do for a new version. But testing, highly recommend to get going, figure out what's required for your machines and your environment and whatnot. What you will find pretty quickly, though, is that some of your devices will have to be either upgraded or reconfigured, or both, to support Windows 11. So if you still have devices out there on TPM 1.2, make sure that one is upgraded to TPM 2. If you have all the BIOSes, upgrade those so that you can actually go in and enable different type of TPM settings. For example, next to me, you can't see it, but have a computer right there. It's a gaming rig I bought a few years back. That one doesn't have TPM chip per se, but it does have a supported CPU. So I had to put in a new BIOS update and do a configuration to enable CPU-enabled TPM support, because both Intel and AMD actually has that. But that means that this is stuff that you will have to add into your various deployment solutions or sequences, or create separate sequences that actually does this type of configuration. Sorry about that. Sneezing, I had to mute before I exploded some microphones here, or headset. But demo time, why not? Now, in terms of, that was from a question yesterday, nothing to do with Windows 11. We still have the concept, like always. Thin versus thick images. Should we have thin images without applications? Should we have thick images with applications? In general, the IT industry is going to this trend to have very thin images and do things at deployment time instead. Because if you do, you can actually use the single image for all of your 4 scenarios that Windows 11 supports. The very second you start to pour apps into an image, you cannot use that image for in-place servicing. So now you need to maintain 2 images, one thicker for these scenarios and one thinner for this scenario. It's not the end of the world. You can quite easily automate that process and create things. But in general, of course, this is where we're going. Now, most organizations who are actually still using thicker images, they do that for 2 reasons. They do that for deployment speed, and they do that for solving very complex application installs, like CAD/CAM software, developer stations, things like that. But even customers that I've been talking to lately that used to do thick images for deployment speed, what they have learned is that there are other things where you can do to actually speed up the process if it's only the speed that you are kind of interested in. So for a start, running sequences in high performance does make a difference, high performance mode or power plan. Cutting down your images, having them thin, speeds up deployment. They apply very quickly, of course, but if you have large applications, like this is a quite large application. Readers Max 2021. Don't get me started on the 2022 versions, because those installers leave some room for improvement. But anyhow, if I go properties on this particular application, you can see, sure, it's big, but it's not massive. It's 4 gigs in size, but this is usually what kills performance. It has to download 18,000 small files over the network. It's not that big of a deal if you're on a local network, but if you're doing HTTPS imaging, cloud imaging, or imaging from cloud management gateway, stuff like that, it's going to take some time to get this stuff down. So there are other things you can do to mitigate that. I mean, we have the obvious factors that we have better network. We have better hardware in general. Better with the B. We have SSDs and whatnot. But you can also package apps differently. You can create application WIMs instead of OS image WIMs. So I can basically take this application that I have here and create a WIM file out of that folder. And I don't even have to extract that at deployment time. I can just mount that WIM file and run the installer, and now it's fairly quick. So if I go over real quick to one of my demo machines here, not that one, but let's see, not that server. I have a few different servers, as you do. Where did you go, my friend? Vim applications here. So this is just a little PowerShell snippet that takes an existing package that I have. In this case, on a file server, CM1, my config managed site server, and just spit out the Vim file with the content from that folder. So that's how you create the Vim file. And then I have the actual installer that simply, before it runs the installer, it will mount the Vim file, run the installer, and then dismount the Vim file. Depending on timing and whatnot, you may have to add in some extra cleanup operations here, like running a DSM cleanup Vim and whatnot. But this process works fairly well, and I see more and more organizations are starting to use this technique to speed up deployment without per se having to store the app inside of the Vim image. Scott is asking a question: what's the benefit of having a Vim file versus zip and any other type of archiving tool? One big benefit is that you don't have to do an extraction of it. Sure, on an SSD drive, it only takes a few minutes to extract the 3ds Max packet with 18,000 files. But if you don't have to, it's quicker to just mount it. What I also found with some extensive testing, I should have blogged about that on our blog a while ago. I spent some time on comparing different algorithms for different type of driver packages. I was trying the most commonly used archiving tools against basically Vim files. And I was testing with just tons of driver packages in general. And what I found for that test was that even though tools like 7-zip with like ultra compression level certainly generated the smallest footprint on the server side, it actually generated more network traffic and more disk usage on the client compared to when using Vim files. Because in this case, we were testing with branch cache, and branch cache supports data deduplication, and data deduplication only transfers blocks that are different. So not only is it faster to mount the Vim file than a zip file to extract it, it's also more effective for network transfers when using data deduplication. So you can actually see that even though the size on the server was at least 50% more, it was actually almost 2 gigs less to transfer over the network for the same amount of content. Austin is asking, can you please pitch the Vim idea to modern driver management? In fact, I already did, and Maurice was kindly enough to implement that change. I forgot which month, but it has this in the latest few versions. I can show you how that looks. If I go over to my machine here, this one, and open up the driver automation tool. This is a great tool to create driver packages in Config Manager or MDT for that matter. But this particular tool, as soon as it's coming here, in Config Manager settings, there is now an option to have the tool create Vim files on the fly. So it can do zip, 7-zip, and Vim files. and I recommend Vim files. It's not going to be the smallest packages, but it's going to be the best package. So if you haven't used this tool, highly recommend it. It's really good stuff. Find the download link here. We've been using it in for production for years now, and lots of different customers. But this is a great tool. I'll put the link in the chat right about now. Matt is asking a follow-up question regarding, okay, what if I'm using a CMG? Will compressing stuff into a Vim file save me money? Yeah, absolutely. You pay for download, you pay for egress. And obviously, for example, AutoCAD is 7 gig uncompressed and 2 gig compressed. Well, you just save like, I don't know, percentage, 70% cost for doing CMD deployments. So absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So for those of you that actually do need a thick image for whatever reason, it could be an education or you simply need it for deployment speed. And I still recommend, even though it's not fully officially supported, I recommend to use MDT 8456 plus hotfix for UEFI detection to do this. I have tested quite a few build-in captures of Windows 11. And there is one thing that's going to break it guaranteed. If you happen to have internet access on that VM when you do your build-in capture, it's not going to get all the updates that normally breaks this spread. It's also going to get Windows or OneDrive that being updated, because that one is done differently in Windows 11 compared to Windows 10. Now, you can add a script to your sequence. So I go to this on here. And if this was a sequence for build-in capture, you can certainly add in, not that one, but this one. You can add in a little script here that just go ahead and uninstalls OneDrive the very second before sysprep runs, and it usually works. But there is a timing margin there that can actually, because OneDrive is pretty aggressive in downloading updates to itself. So if it happens too slow, you may find that sysprep breaks anyway. What I've been doing, I've been simply pausing my gateway when I'm building my image. I've seen some organizations just putting in a block in the firewall. I've seen some organizations adding in a block in the sequence itself to block the firewall. One way or another, just disable internet access temporarily when you do your build-in capture, and life is good. Then you don't have any issues. Then you don't see stuff like this one here. This one is obviously for Windows 10, but trust me, the same thing happens for Windows 11. Sysprep doesn't like it, MBT doesn't like it, and it breaks. So just disable internet access and problem is solved. Other than that, I've been happily or successful with doing lots of Windows 11 deployments through MBT. I have done tons of deployments from a config manager. The only requirement are, once again, we have to go up on 2107 to be supported. We have to have ADK11 to be supported. It happens to work with older versions at the moment, but I expect some servicing capabilities to simply not be available. But so far, it's been working quite well. Even for in-place upgrades, even though if you start to test on virtual machines and whatnot, you often find it breaking because Windows 11 is not like applicable or fully supported on whatever virtual platform you are using. Again, Windows 11 does have significantly higher hardware requirements compared to Windows 10. And I don't think it matters where you work, what vertical, what type of organizations. For the next few years, you're going to have to support both. You have to support both Windows 10 and Windows 11, because you won't be able to deploy Windows 11 to all your devices unless you are one of those super lucky few organizations that only have really no hardware that are fully configured for Windows 11. So going to coexist for a while, but that's not a big deal in my opinion. Instead of having one sequences, we're having two, and eventually the hardware vendors will catch up, and life would be good. So let's see, some other questions coming in. Can I use this Vim app package method for Intune apps? Yes, you absolutely can, even though the Intune Win app is a little packaging tool on its own. But these days, you can put basically anything in a Win32 app. I have done some very unsupported tweaks where I'm not just putting apps in a Win32 apps, I'm actually putting in an MDT media, an offline media with a sequence and an OSWIM file and a bootwim and all that good stuff into an app, and I run it through a wrapper script. And you can do the same thing for anything you want to deploy. Intune can run scripts. You can run a script as an app. You can have proactive remediation script. There is usually always a way to figure out how to get down data quickly, even when just using Intune for deployment, because Windows Intune or Microsoft Intune doesn't have OSD, but with a little bit of clever engineering, it's doable. So if you search my blog for the keyword cloud, you found a blog post from back in 2018 when I was running MDT sequences from Intune. That back then, it was more difficult. These days, it's easier. So hopefully that. Provide a link for the MDT hotfix. I'll be happy to. I actually did some fixes in between. Let's see, BIOS. Yeah, so before the hotfix was released, I had to fix this differently with custom scripts, but this is the hotfix right here. So putting this link in the chat for you, and this one contains some more background info together with a link to the hotfix itself. Just a friendly tip there. Don't just add it to your MDT installation directory. Make sure to also add it with all your existing deployment shares so you have it everywhere. So let's see, modern driver management, can it handle UVP packages? Unfortunately not, at least not in this version or the latest version I've been using. What you do need for that is obviously to have a Danish person named Sune. He has been logging quite a lot about their journey on how to deploy some drivers and devices that simply require like a companion app from the App Store. And these days, the vendors are actually pretty good at providing that. A few years back, you actually have to beg to even to get it. But this is some good information about deploying them as part of your normal imaging process. So I'll put that in the chat for you as well. I haven't seen any of those for Windows 11 yet, but I kind of expect them to show up fairly quickly, like the Arwidmark driver and some other graphics drivers and whatnot. Yeah. So I hope I answered that question. Other than that, you continue to create your sequences in MDT like you always have. You add in your Windows 11 media. You create sequences with it, like this one here. And as you see, the version number is going to be 10.0. And then the build number for Windows 11, even though it is Windows 11. On the config manager side of things, same stuff there. If I take an upgrade package that I have on Windows 11 that I have on this server. We go. It's coming. It's just thinking about it. You see the edition, Windows 10, or whatever edition you want to view. Here's where I have my package. This is just a content folder from an ISO that I have added. And when you add it in, there is now an option to actually accept the license agreement that Arya mentioned during import. And you can even extract WIM files if you want during import these days in Config Manager. But if you compare this to Windows 10, this is nothing different. They work the same, this type of images. One thing I have seen a few organizations kind of missing is that they learned that you need ADK11, fantastic. They add in the Windows 11 image, but they forgot to update their boot images. So here I have a classic example for when you do not update your boot image. Still works, but you need to go up one level of the ADK to be fully supported. And if I have an image with an older ADK and do an update DP, it will actually tell you, not in this one, but it will tell you that the ones that installed is a version and that your boot image is another. And even more importantly here, the client version is different. Because Config Manager actually adds in OSD binaries. It's like a mini Config Manager client agent into WinPE. And you want to make sure that that one has support and is tested for Windows 11 as well. So once you remove the old ADK, you install the new ADK, don't forget to go in here to your various boot images and upgrade them, not just to get the ADK version, which you have to select this checkbox to get, but also to get the actual binaries here that are matching the Config Manager 2107 version. There was a question regarding using servicing plans with Config Manager for Windows 11. I expect so. I just haven't tried it. So if anyone has that are in the chat, feel free to let me know. But this is something I don't see why it would be any different, because Windows 11 feature updates is just another upgrade package that you can select when you configure your software updates. So if I would go in here and enable the Windows 11, well, first of all, you need to have the upgrade classification selected, obviously. But if I go over the products and pick Windows 11 in addition to Windows 10, like this one here, I would be very, very surprised if I would not see Windows 11 updates in this feature update node here. What I do know that you can do is that you can go in here, and as soon as they become available as ESD files, they might be already actually, but let's see what I have. I'm going to check this Windows 10 one. In the step that does the upgrade, you can pick and select an ESD file instead. This is especially useful if you're doing cloud imaging upgrades over CMG, because then you don't have to download it beforehand. You can have the client download it from Microsoft, and then you don't have to pay for it. So you're saving like 40 cents for every upgrade compared to having your own custom Vim file that you might have for an on-premises upgrade. So I like to say that the answer is yes, but I actually haven't verified for the servicing plans. Question regarding deployment research console. I don't quite follow the question. Deployment research is my blog, but I don't really have a console named. Deployment research. If you're referring to the deployment workbench, this is the management tool for Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. This is a standalone deployment solution. And currently Microsoft only offers two, one that is Config Manager, one that is MDT, and well, 2.5 if you add in that you can actually integrate them to each other also. So if I didn't answer that one correct, please clarify again, and I'll give it another go. But this is pretty much it, like a super summary in terms of Windows 11 deployments. And that means that we have right now reached basically additional Q&A. Any questions you might have? I see Niehaus is still in the call. I'm not sure if he's listening, but thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for all the good questions. I'll be sticking around for a bit more if you have any additional questions, and they can be on basically anything. If you haven't seen it, we do run the office hours every Wednesday. So that's also an opportunity for you guys to come in and ask questions. Most of the time we run them in the afternoon, but sometimes we also run them in the mornings, just to give people in Europe a fighting chance to be able to join without having to stay up to close to midnight, just to be able to ask some questions. I mention this basically every chance I get, but in these days, having a lab environment is probably the best thing you can have for yourself when testing out Config Manager 11, MDT, Intune, whatever. Just one of the best tools there is. And this is a totally free course on how to set up how I label it, the perfect lab environment for Config Manager. So if you haven't seen that one, by all means, it's an hour and a half. Invites friends and family. It's a Friday good show instead of watching whatever you're watching on Friday. This is a good, if you have kids, they will love it, totally. Maybe not. All right, any other questions? So there was a question regarding Windows 11 and Intune to make it available for only some machines. Absolutely. If you configure the new policies and apply them to a group, or not apply, assign them to a group in Intune that yes, contain a subset of your devices, it's only going to be applicable for those. So you can definitely do like your own little test pilot group and make them available there. So absolutely, yes. Aria showed or talked about those policies a little bit during her session, but you have to actively opt in to get Windows 11. You have to configure those policies. And of course, you can assign those policies to a given group of machines. see what else. Could I keep the existing 21H2 approved? Let's see. Could I keep using the existing 21H1 approved Dell drivers with Windows 11 and Windows? Okay, so basically driver support. Until vendors fully supports Windows 11 drivers and they start to release drivers for Windows 11, my only recommendation if you want to play around and test with it is to use the latest Windows 10 driver that happened to be available. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, well, you can try to use an inbox driver and see if that works. Otherwise, you'll simply have to wait until the vendor makes a driver for Windows 11 available. Going forward, I expect us having to maintain separate drivers for those two operating systems. Pretty much like you had to do for some of the Windows 10 versions even. For example, back in 1709, there were stuff that definitely would not work with an 1809 of Windows 10. There was a question regarding connected cache. Can I set up that to speed up autopilot deployments? Yes, you absolutely can. You have the license to do so when you when you buy Intune, you get config managers, you can just spin up a site server where you enable a distribution point, enable connected cache, and you can configure your Intune clients to use a connected cache. That's a supported scenario. It would have been nice if the standalone version of connected cache would have been available. It's not. There was no new information at Ignite either when exactly it's going to be released, but it's still work in progress. But at the same time, you can just spin up a VM with config manager and use that in the staging center. And that will speed up the process. Because machines doesn't have to download the stuff from internet. It can grab it from a local cache server. Jay is asking, is there a way to stop system from breaking when having internet access available? There used to be ways to do it quite effectively, but they seem not to work anymore. There used to be a simple way to have an offline script that would basically go in and block, let's see, both consumer experience and Windows Store updates, and that would be enough to make SysPrep happy. This is no longer the case, so you have to actually combine this with PowerShell script that removes those packages prior to SysPrep running. And it's starting to be this little race where you have to make sure that you win, otherwise SysPrep will break and you'll have a broken image and won't capture correctly. So right now, my recommendation is to ditch internet access while you're building it. You shouldn't need it. For updates, you can make sure that the Vim file you're building from is updated already. And if there are any components, well, you can update that when you actually deploy the image later. But it's a little bit of a mess to deal with SysPrep right now, unfortunately. Can you show MDT driver management? Well, that's a little bit tricky because you don't really have versions per se, like you can have a config manager package with a different version. In MDT, if you want to do versioning, you will basically have to use folder structures for that here. Like you will keep version, etc., and then you will have to find a different way of doing matching. I don't see many MDT customers dealing with driver versioning. They usually just replace existing drivers. So if they have a driver set for a G3 Studio and they need to do some updates, they just change the drivers in here. But technically, it is possible because when you reference these folders, when you have a sequence that needs a driver of some sort, you can definitely go in and add in a variable driver group and instead of just specifying the traditional, 11 64, which is stupid because Windows 11 is only available in 64, but you can do model %model and you can have some sort of version number after. As long as this one resolves from here to a matching folder here, you're good. So it's certainly doable, but I don't see many of the customers doing it. I hope that kind of answered that question. Let's see. Is Intune an advantage if we don't have local breakouts in branch cache, or is using Microsoft Express route for all traffic, or is config manager still a better choice? I'm assuming you are referring to this as for application deployment, because Intune doesn't have imaging. It's only config manager that does have true support for imaging. So you don't really have a choice there. I think I'm going to need a little bit more clarification on that question, Andreas. I'm not quite following. Let's see. Isaac had a question. We have created OUs for image builds, so no policies are applied during OSD, but field techs forget this and insist on building them in production OUs, which can break stuff. If you have policies that are breaking imaging, and that's pretty much only applicable for MDT, I recommend putting automation around that. The way I usually go about doing that is to force machines to always be deployed into a staging OU and then have the sequence in the end of itself before the final reboot, move the machine automatically into whatever OU it's supposed to be in. So that's how I prefer to deal with stuff like that. I don't like so much running client-side script that does things in Active Directory. I prefer to route that through a web service of sorts. And that can be a PowerShell web service, it can be a C# web service. It doesn't matter. The more important stuff is that you take that logic and put it on a server-side component that doesn't have limitations. Did not post the link to setting up a lab at home. I'll be happy to do so. There's another question. This one here. Did one in Q4, so that recording is already available. If you want to look up that one, we're going to do a new one for Q1 next year also. All right. Right, was a follow-up clarification to Andreas' questions earlier. Basically, we are using Config Manager to maintain about 16,000 devices for OS deployment, application deployment, patching, etc. We also have an internet connection at each location. No, a central internet connection. So every traffic is going through this one. Would there be an advantage to move into Intune? Well, from a core traffic point of view, for example, software updates, you don't have to download from your distribution point. If a local office would have an internet breakout, you can instruct those clients to get the updates, software updates from internet instead of getting them from a DP. So that's why I'm doing that. I see customers setting up various SD-WAN connections where they're basically routing certain types of traffic that used to be internal only, but they're routing it through internet because a normal location actually had, or remote location had a better internet access. For a download point of view, you can certainly put up content on a cloud management gateway in Config Manager. But once again, that is content you will have to pay for. If you put those apps in Intune, you don't have to, because download is included. So if you want to move more downloads from internet rather than internal servers, well, Intune can be a very good choice for applications, but it's not a good choice for deployment because it doesn't have it. So, Austin had a question regarding third-party application scripts for OSD. Have I seen anything that is not just working for Windows 11? Not just yet. I did see some reports about FWSMUG not being 100%, but I haven't had a chance to verify that claim just yet. But all my own custom customizations, front ends and scripts, and even Dart seem to work just fine in ADK11. So if anyone has stumbled across something, please put it in the chat and I'll be happy to share it. But I haven't seen anything yet. Again, Windows 11 is fairly new, so. So a question regarding 32-bit Windows 10. 16-bit apps support. No, I don't. I think we'll have to stick around. If you have apps that requires 32-bit still, you will have to keep Windows 10. I don't know on any way to get those to run in 64-bit, unless I misunderstood the question. That there is no way of doing an OS upgrade from 32 to 64. That's been blocked by the setup, but we can certainly do a computer refresh from a Windows 10 32-bit up to a Windows 11 64-bit. But that's the same thing as you have currently with Windows 10. Right. Yeah. The other questions. We have a whooping 2 minutes to spare here. This is not bad at all. Jason had a comment, if I add a pause to install some legacy apps, the build-in capture will fail. Yeah, that's exact same problem. Is the Windows machine is allowed to talk to internet a little bit too long. It's going to install stuff that Sysprep doesn't like. So again, my recommendation is to block internet access on that box while you are installing those legacy applications, or you will have to run some clever scripts that remove Apex packages prior to Sysprep runs. But that you may have a mixed result with. It's more reliable to simply restrict internet access to that virtual machine that you're using for your build and capture process. And all right, that is 2 p.m. 3 hours of good content. On behalf of our user group, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you very much for all speakers that are joining. We'll get the recordings up at some point tonight to our YouTube channels. If you missed anything or just want to go back and review some of the demos, by all means. But until next time, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.